Okay, we're going to pick up our review of the population with the demographic transition model. Oops, I think I went past it, didn't I? There it is. All right. Okay, again, if you guys get a question with the demographic transition model, I hope you're like eternally grateful. This is a wonderful theory to talk about, this model to talk about, and you can talk about anything, right? You can talk about population, you can talk about urbanization, industrialization, you can talk about economics between the different countries, you can talk about where they are in development, whether they're periphery or core periphery or core. But remember, the demographic transition model talks only about population. And they're not talking about all those other things, but you can fit those other things into this model. All right. If we remember correctly, we're talking about the 5 stages that all countries go through according to this model. And every country is at a different place on this particular model. They could be, in stage 2 or stage 3. But remember, stage 3 starts here and continues all the way over to here. So a country can be early entry into stage 3, or a country that's about to leave stage 3 and go into stage 4. All right, there are several things that you have to look at with regard to the demographic transition theory. The first one here is this green line on the graph, right? That is the birth rate. The blue line is the death rate, right? So the difference between the two is the natural increase that we just talked about, the difference between births and deaths. And at different times during the stages that these countries go through, they will have higher birth rates or lower birth rates, depending on what they are, right? This curve that you see here, right, this is total population. This is what sometimes you'll see referred to as an S curve, right? It starts low. Right, we have tremendous amounts of population growth during times of great natural increase, right? And then if we are in stage 5, right, we are seeing a potential natural decrease where deaths are actually higher than the birth rate. All right, so let's start with stage 1. Right, stage 1 is the hunter-gatherer stage. All countries started in stage 1. Right, when they're all hunter-gatherers, there is no real agriculture going on at this point in time, other than the gathering things that most of the women in the tribes are doing. Right, you have a very high birth rate. Right, sometimes it's higher than others. When times are good, people have more babies. When times are bad, they don't. Right, what could be bad? Right, famine, some kind of pandemic. Right, that would cause the birth rate to decrease. Same thing with the death rate. It's going up, it's going down, right? So sometimes things are good. When there's plenty to eat, the death rate may go down. During times of famine, pandemic, war, right, it may go up a bit, right? So at this time, you see there's very little difference between birth rate and death rate, right? Stage 1 is a period of relatively slow growth, right? There's not much going on right now. We are seeing probably towards the end of stage 1 some level of agriculture getting started, right? Very much subsistence farming, some form of pastoral farming where people are taking care of animals, right? So lots of deaths, lots of births, and very little growth, right? A lot of death occurs here with child and infant mortality. And people aren't really living very far, to an old age at this point in time anyway, right? So it's stage 1, right, very slow growth, and most people agree there is no country anymore that is still in the hunter-gatherer stage, right, or this very early subsistence farming. Every country has moved out. So every country now is either between 2 and 4. Possibly there are somebody in 5, but most people will agree everything else is starting in stage 2. All right, stage 2 economies. We are now agricultural based for the most part. You mostly see subsistence farming around here, and we know that if you're a farmer, you want to have lots of people on hand because more hands make lighter work and everybody makes more food and we can all live longer. So birth rates tend to stay high in a stage 2 country, right? If we are going to add additional things to this population model, right, stage 2 countries are probably peripheral, right? They are countries that are engaged in primary, possibly a little bit as they move out of stage 2, some secondary economic activity, right? Primary being things where you pull from the ground, agriculture, logging, mining, fishing, right? Stage 2 secondary economic activities involves maybe a bit of manufacturing, but birth rates are still high. Children are assets here, right? But you notice what's starting to go down, and that's the death rate, right? The death rate is starting to go down for primarily 2 reasons. One is that we are having better agriculture. Right? Agriculture has developed since those early subsistence days. Better agriculture means we eat better, but it means that we are healthier and we will live longer. Right? Also, we're having better medicine at this time. Better medicine also gives us a long period of time. Not enough, right? If you're an agricultural-based society, you're not going to give up having a lot of children. And we're still seeing a fairly high infant and child mortality rate at this time. So people are still having a lot of children because they don't expect them to live, even though that death rate's going down. And at this point in time, you see a great level of natural increase, right? So we are having the beginnings of, a population boom. As you move towards the end of stage 2, I'm going to figure out how to get rid of that one of these days. All right, at the beginning of stage 2, we are moving into a industrial type of situation, right? Think the Industrial Revolution, right? At this point in time, people are moving to the cities. They are less farmers and more manufacturers, factory workers, right? And so you will see that birth rate starts to go down. If I am working in a factory, children are not an asset to me, right? They are not going to help me in the factory. So I don't need to have as many children. Right? The death rate's still going down, right? But at the very beginning of stage 3, right here, at the end of stage 2, beginning of stage 3, this is that population explosion where we see the doubling rate being very, very small. And we are actually going from like 2 billion to 4 billion in a very short period of time. Because now we have much better agriculture. Remember, before the Industrial Revolution, you have the second agricultural revolution. We're producing more food, so we can feed all those people who are living in the cities, right? So the birth rate starts to go down. The death rate continues to go down, but at a much slower rate than we see in stage 2, right? Stage 3 countries are pretty much what we're going to call the semi-peripheral countries, right? These are countries that are industrializing. And even some core countries would be possibly at the end of stage 3, right? Lots more manufacturing. So we are into secondary, potentially tertiary economic activities, right? More service-oriented, right? Less agricultural. Birth rates are coming down. Population growth is slowing at this point in time. So you're going to have mostly semi-peripheral sitting in this one, right? And as we move to stage 4, you'll see that the birth rate is coming down even more as that death rate's leveling off. And by the end of stage 4, we have little to no growth rate at this point in time, right? Stage 4 countries, we're still talking, remember, population, right? Our population is still increasing. The S curve is still going up because we don't have just countries in 4. We have countries in 2 and 3. We're having high birth rates, right? But stage 4 countries, from a population standpoint, have much slower growth. Those core countries are characterized by low population growth. They are more service-oriented, possibly post-industrial. They aren't making stuff anymore. We outsource everything. And we also have a great more people being involved in higher level servicing skills, right? In tertiary, quaternary, and quinary services. Women are in the workplace. Women have higher levels of education. So they are going to put off getting married. They're going to put off having children. And since we're not agriculture and we don't need to have kids, right? Kids are now going to cost us money, so we're going to have fewer and fewer of them. Right, stage 5 is the place where you see a potential natural decrease. And you see a lot of question marks on this particular graph. And that's for a couple of reasons, because people don't agree that there are countries who are in stage 5. Right, stage 5 is seeing a potentially zero population growth, and in some cases maybe even a negative growth. If you look at countries like Germany, Japan, and some of the Scandinavian countries, then you're going to potentially see some negative population growth, right? That it is actually getting smaller. And we've talked about some of the things that those countries have done in that. All right? Again, remember, demographic transition is only a population model. It only deals with population. If they ask you, what does the population or demographic transition model say, don't answer them about industrial and core and periphery, right? You're talking about birth rates and death rates only and population increase, right? So when you get that, make sure that that's what you emphasize in that question. And then fill in, right? Typically countries who are found in stage 2 with a high birth rate are that way because of being agricultural, right? Stage 3 countries tend to have a lower birth rate because we're moving from agricultural to industrial, right? And 4 from industrial to service. Okay, so I hope that answers that question. Make sure that you're remembering that the demographic transition is simply a population model. All right, the next one we're going to talk about, hopefully I can get this in before the time runs out, is Malthus, right? Malthus is incredibly important. Malthus, remember, is an early philosopher who's saying, look, our population growth here is this curve, right? This curve is exponentially growing, and that's exactly what our population looks like. However, he said our production of food is linear, right? It's not growing at the same level as our population rate. And at some point, we'll hit this intersection where we have more people than we have food for them. And he predicted some very dire population problems, famine, war, people fighting over land, particularly agricultural land. While Malthus did not plan on all the issues not the issues, but the advances that came about in agriculture, right? All of the industrial machinery, pesticides, fertilizers, GMOs, and what have you, right? He also didn't realize that there were 2 other continents on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean that would expand the amount of agricultural land that we have, right? His prediction, and I asked you guys a question on this one, his prediction is not all that far off. If indeed we are overdeveloping and developing to such an extent that we are taking very good farmland and using it for houses and parks and schools and what have you, that at some point in time we won't have enough farmland to feed everybody in our population. Right now we do. And the reason we have so many people starving is because we can't get them the food. Our distribution is flawed. Additionally, because we have people who are in immense poverty who can't afford all this great food, that we are producing. So make sure when you talk about Malthus, right, you are talking about, his prediction of not being able to feed people. One other thing that sometimes you'll see, what typically most people will call an S curve, right, because it looks like a big S. There are some people who call this the J curve because it kind of looks like a J as well. So you have the J curve of population and the J curve of food production, even though it's not necessarily in the shape of a J. All right? So please make sure, again, Malthus is talking about population and food production. All right? Don't go into any other issues with that one. All right, we're going to wrap this one up, and then we're going to finish up with population pyramids. And then we'll be done with our review of population.